The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Scientific Alliance had never felt so tense. Spanning nearly half a kilometer in length, with polished crystalline panels glowing in synchronized rhythm, the chamber was supposed to symbolize unity among the 17 most advanced civilizations in the known universe. It was the beating heart of galactic intellect, a place where trillions of years of combined knowledge met to shape the cosmos. Yet on this particular day, something as trivial as a message from a young species had managed to stir unease among the stars. The message was short, polite, and delivered without flair. "Please don't make us mad. You really won't like what happens." The reaction was instant and predictable. Laughter. Not loud, mocking laughter, but the kind of smug, condescending chuckles that only beings with eons of dominance behind them could produce. To most in the chamber, it was absurd. These bipeds from a tiny blue planet, barely 2 centuries into interstellar travel, were issuing warnings to civilizations that had split atoms before humans even discovered fire? Supreme Commander Valor, a massive being with shifting skin that glimmered like flowing metal, was the first to speak. "Another warning?" he asked aloud, his deep voice echoing across the chamber with carefully disguised disdain. How quaint. The chamber buzzed with murmurs and amused hisses. Jokes were passed between delegations in multiple languages, most of them about how humans were still using combustion for transportation and hadn't yet unlocked proper quantum manipulation. The idea that they posed any sort of meaningful threat was, to them, unthinkable. Only one voice in the chamber didn't join in the laughter. Dr. Claire, chief xenobiologist of the Vacant Empire, a species known for their adaptive intelligence and iridescent scales, remained silent. His gaze stayed fixed on the data hovering in midair above the table, and his scales, usually vibrant, had begun to darken, a clear sign of anxiety among his kind. When he finally rose to speak, the room quieted. "Esteemed colleagues," he began with deliberate calm, "I understand that many of you find the humans' behavior humorous, but I believe we're making a critical error in judgment." That earned a few raised brows and a couple skeptical tail flicks. He gestured toward the holographic display. "This isn't just a message," he continued. "It's a pattern. A recurring behavioral trait we've been too arrogant to take seriously. Every time the humans have issued a warning like this throughout their history, polite, even deferential, it's been followed by responses that defy all expectations." He flicked his claw, and images began to appear. Grainy black and white footage of human wars, newsreels from their first moon landing, their primitive-looking yet effective early spacecraft, powered flight to lunar landing in 66 years, from splitting the atom to building fusion reactors in less than a century. Every time someone challenged them, cornered them, or threatened their survival, they didn't just fight back, they transformed their society, their science, their understanding of reality itself. The murmurs returned, but this time they were more subdued. High Counselor Zenra, her body crystalline and constantly refracting the ambient light, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that we take this species seriously? They still rely on chemical propulsion and lack stable field-based computing. Their neural AI is a joke." Claire didn't blink. "Their current technology isn't the point," he replied. "It's the trend, the response curve. What they do when provoked." Another flick of his claw and the data changed. Graphs showing human progress during times of peace versus times of war. The difference was staggering. "This is what you're not seeing," he said, his voice growing sharper. "They don't just adapt, they accelerate. Their growth rate during conflict isn't linear, it's exponential." Commander Valor ruled, a massive tendril in the air, dismissively. "Coincidences, random bursts of development. Every species has had surges during war. Ours did. Yours did." Claire stared directly at him. "Yes, but none of us made it our specialty." There was a long silence. He pressed a final command and a new hologram floated into view. A collection of quotes, reports, and intercepted messages from Earth's diplomatic communications over the last few decades. The phrase repeated itself over and over, in different formats, with subtle variations but one unifying message. "Please don't make us mad." "They say it softly," Claire said. "They smile when they say it. They frame it as a polite request. But every single time, every time it has preceded an escalation we were not prepared for. In their own history, civilizations that underestimated them no longer exist." "Are you seriously telling us?" Zenra interjected, her body pulsing with disbelief. That we should fear a warning that sounds like a parent scolding a child? No, Claire replied coldly. I'm telling you, we should respect it. Across the chamber, some members shifted uncomfortably. They were starting to feel it, not fear, not yet, but a seed of doubt. Doubt in the assumption they had carried for so long, that they were the masters of this galaxy, and humanity was just the new kid in the classroom, too small to matter. But Claire had spent decades studying humanity. He'd read their histories, not just their wars, but their mythologies, their stories, their philosophies. He'd seen the way they processed conflict, not with immediate violence like the Hive Mind Collective, not with cold logic like the Silicon Consciousness. Humans, when pushed, first warned, then they waited, then, if still pressed, they acted, and they acted hard. He knew about Pearl Harbor, about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, about the moon race, born from rivalry and paranoia. He understood how fear drove them, how desperation made them invent miracles. They weren't violent by fear. But when cornered, they didn't just bite, they evolved. And they evolved fast. You're saying, Zenra continued almost mockingly, that their warning isn't about weapons? Claire nodded. Exactly. It's not about their ships, or their guns, or their reactors. It's about them. About what they become when they're angry. The chamber went silent once more. And then just like that, the moment passed. Supreme Commander Valor waved a tentacle and declared, concern noted, but irrelevant. The relocation of the Epsilon colony proceeds as planned. And that was it. Claire sat down, his scales still darkened. Around him, the combined intellect of 17 civilizations had missed the point. They were all asking the wrong question. Not, what can humans do now? But, what will they do when we give them no choice? He sighed deeply, his mind already turning. He knew this wasn't over. That line, please don't make us mad, wasn't just polite phrasing. It was a warning, a genuine, heartfelt warning, and they had ignored it, just like all the others. The first warnings, Earth's echoes through history long before humans ever ventured into deep space. They had been issuing this warning not in those exact words, but in meaning, in tone, in action. The Aztecs underestimated a few ragtag Spanish explorers. The British underestimated a scattered band of colonists in North America. Germany underestimated the industrial might of a nation half a world away during 2 world wars. Time and again, humans had sent signals, don't provoke us, don't corner us. Don't mistake our patience for weakness. And every time that warning was ignored, history was rewritten. It wasn't just war that followed. It was invention, progress, a leap in understanding. They never just fought. They adapted so thoroughly that their enemies didn't recognize them by the end of the conflict. Pearl Harbor gave birth to atomic fire. Sputnik led to the moon. 9/11 sparked 2 decades of asymmetric warfare and surveillance revolutions. Humans didn't win wars with brute strength. They won them with creativity born out of necessity. And necessity, for them, was always the trigger. Claire understood all of this, and it terrified him. Because what he saw now was a galaxy that had just poked the bear. Hard. The message no one understood, the message the humans had sent, was so simple, so quiet, so polite. Please don't make us mad, but it was never a threat. It was a plea. It was the last olive branch offered before the storm. And like all those who had dismissed it before, the Galactic Council had chosen arrogance over wisdom. Now, they would learn, just like the rest of human history had taught anyone willing to read it, that when humanity warns you softly, you should be afraid. Because when they stop warning, it's already too late. The Council didn't just dismiss the warnings, they scoffed at them. For the brilliance housed within the walls of the Galactic Scientific Alliance, for all the shimmering monuments to civilization's greatest minds and longest-lived cultures, there was one simple truth that no one seemed willing to acknowledge. They thought they were too advanced to be wrong. The meeting following the human warning had been intended to be short, procedural, and uneventful. The relocation of the Epsilon colony was already underway on paper. Votes had been counted even before the official deliberation began. For most in attendance, the entire affair was a formality, a rubber stamp on a decision made weeks prior. Only Dr. Claire remained uneasy. From his seat near the rear of the chamber, he watched as another representative mocked Earth's diplomacy. They've only just figured out how to stabilize basic quantum cores, said the envoy from the Threx Coalition, his voice full of amusement. And they believe they can tell us what to do. They believe it, came the dry reply from High Counselor Zenra. That's the most charming part. Dr. Clare gritted his teeth, a very human expression he'd picked up from years of studying them. He resisted the urge to respond. He'd already made his case in the previous assembly. He had shared the data. He had shown the patterns. But it had been brushed aside as paranoia, as speculative sociology at best. And now, here they were, laughing at a species that had managed to go from steam engines to faster-than-light travel in just a few generations. It wasn't just arrogance, it was institutional arrogance, woven deep into the fabric of the Council's existence. They had conquered gravity fields, manipulated dark energy, navigated hyperspace as effortlessly as humans navigated highways. To admit fear, especially of a younger species, was not only taboo, it was culturally impossible for some. We are not going to let a backwater colony dictate our strategic priorities, Supreme Commander Valor said, his booming voice once again silencing the room. This junction is vital to galactic expansion. The Epsilon sector connects 9 major trade routes. Earth's claim to it is irrelevant. They established a colony there nearly 15 years ago. Dr. Clare spoke up quietly but clearly. The fact that they beat us to the location should give us pause. It shows foresight, planning, intent. Zenra turned her crystalline eyes toward him. It shows luck. Nothing more. No, Counselor, Clare said, standing now. It shows preparation. They anticipated that the sector would become valuable before we even noticed it. Valor waved a tentacle, his movements sharp with annoyance. And you believe this has caused a halt in operation already in motion? Clare nodded. I do. Another ripple of laughter moved through the chamber. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to let him know where he stood. The sole voice of dissent. Again, Valor leaned forward, his tone turning sharp. We are not here to indulge fear. We are here to manage expansion. Earth has had every opportunity to collaborate, to negotiate. Instead, they've sent us a veiled threat disguised as diplomacy. It wasn't a threat, Clare replied. It was a warning, a sincere one. They've issued 3 now, Zenra said. Each one more polite than the last. If anything, that's a sign of submission. They're trying to stall. Clare shook his head. No, that's the mistake. You're interpreting their kindness as weakness. They aren't stalling. They're giving us a choice. A chance to do the right thing. He looked around the room, letting his eyes move from one delegate to the next. Some looked away. A few looked amused. Most simply looked bored. You're all asking the wrong question, he said finally. You keep asking what they can do. But what you should be asking is, what will they do when we give them no choice? There was silence. And then, as expected, Commander Valor brought the gavel-like arm down on the final motion. The relocation proceeds as planned. The vote was unanimous, except for one. The final courtesy, 1 week later, aboard the Eternal Wisdom, one of the Galactic Council's most revered vessels. The atmosphere was palpably smug. Maya Rodriguez stood at the center of the diplomatic chamber, flanked by nothing. No entourage, no security. Just her crisp Earth diplomatic corps uniform and the weight of her final warning. She stood calmly, even as the largest representatives of the galaxy leaned forward, scrutinizing her like a primitive oddity. You understand? The translated voice of Commander Valor rang out, that the Epsilon colony sits on a vital hyperspace junction? We cannot allow Earth's sentimental attachments to interfere with broader galactic interests. Maya nodded slightly. I understand perfectly, Commander, and that's why I'm here, one final time. To warn you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Warn us? Zenra asked, her crystal facets glowing faintly with amusement. Your kind hasn't even mastered interdimensional phase transitions. You're decades, if not centuries, behind us. Maya remained composed. She pulled out a small hologram device from her belt and activated it. Immediately, a projection of Earth's historical timelines appeared above her wares. Technological leaps, moments of invention birthed from conflict. See the pattern? She asked. We do our best work when we're backed into a corner. Valor rolled his eyes at least, the galactic equivalent of an eye roll. Are we seriously being threatened with historical trivia? No threat, Maya said. Just context. See, we've tried diplomacy. We've made our case. We've asked nicely. Now we're at the point where we have to ask, what happens if you ignore us again? The room shifted. The air changed. Dr. Clare, watching from an observation post above, leaned in. He noticed it. Not the words, But the tone, Maya wasn't angry, she wasn't desperate, she was disappointed. "We've analyzed your capabilities extensively," said a silicon-based being with perfect logic in its voice. "We calculate a 97 chance of successful relocation with minimal resistance." Maya smiled. Then she laughed, a real full-bellied laugh. "You've analyzed our ships, our visible tech, our infrastructure. But that's not what makes us dangerous. What makes us dangerous is what happens when we stop pretending." Valor slammed a control panel, clearly done with the conversation. "You have 1 standard month to evacuate voluntarily." "This meeting is over," Maya nodded, still calm. "I understand. But I'd like the record to show that we gave you every opportunity to avoid this. We tried diplomacy. We gave warnings. We even smiled while doing it." She turned to leave but paused at the door. "One last thing. Before you send in your fleet, maybe read up on the concept of asymmetric warfare, just for context." And then she was gone. Claire barely had time to process it all before his research console lit up with an alert. He opened the feed, and what he saw chilled him. A catastrophic miscalculation. The assault on the Epsilon colony was supposed to be smooth, surgical, by the book. Hundreds of worlds had been subdued this way. The Galactic Council's fleets had perfected relocation procedures down to an art. So when the ships descended over Epsilon, no one expected anything unusual. The scans showed minimal resistance, no defense systems. Just colonists calmly gathering in a plaza, children holding toys, adults waving. Commander Valor relaxed slightly. "Proceed." Beams activated, containment fields engaged, and then nothing. The beams struck empty space. The buildings were real, but the people, gone. "Impossible," one of the officers said aloud. A signal cut across every frequency. It was Maya's voice. "We warned you. The colonists were evacuated weeks ago. What you saw was a hologram. And then everything changed." The colony's fusion core, long thought to be a basic human construct, began emitting unstable energy readings. Claire, still tuned into the situation, scanned the waveforms in horror. "It's not just a reactor," he whispered. "It's a weapon." The explosion wasn't violent. It was elegant, controlled. It folded subspace into itself, collapsing the junction into a dimensional void. The single most important hyperspace crossroad in the galaxy gone. Not a shot fired. Not a single life lost. Just, reminder, you were warned. Pride before the fallback in the council chambers, chaos reigned. "How did they do this?" Zenra demanded. "They shouldn't be capable of such precision." "They shouldn't," Claire agreed grimly. "If we're judging by what they showed us, but that was the mistake. We were looking at the wrong dataset the entire time." A new transmission played this time from Admiral Chen Wheeling of Earth's Defense Force. "Consider this a measured response," she said calmly. "No casualties, no escalation, just a small inconvenience. Imagine what happens if we do escalate." And still Valor roared, "Prepare the fleet. We'll show them what true power looks like." Another message arrived, text only. That was just a courtesy response. "Please don't make us send a serious one." The chamber fell silent, not out of awe, out of fear. Real fear. The kind you feel when you realize that for all your strength, you may have just poked something far more dangerous than you ever imagined. The attack on Epsilon Colony was supposed to be routine. The Galactic Council had executed over 1,000 such relocations before. Worlds settled by species deemed too young or too stubborn to understand galactic logistics were quietly, efficiently reorganized in the name of progress. No violence, no war, just advanced technology and a form of bureaucratic dominance refined over centuries. Epsilon was different only in one regard: it was human. But to the Council, that wasn't a complication. It was an afterthought. Earth's warning, delivered politely through diplomatic channels, had been logged, discussed, and then dismissed. 3 times they'd said it, "Please don't make us mad." And 3 times the Council had ignored it. Now, as dawn rose over the colony's surface, the assault began. Above the planet, in the command center of the Eternal Wisdom, Supreme Commander Valor looked over the readings. His broad tentacles hovered over the command interface, curling with a hint of satisfaction. Dozens of Council warships hovered in orbit, gleaming with the quiet arrogance of authority. Shielded with quantum fields, equipped with weapons capable of vaporizing cities in milliseconds, The fleet represented 17 civilizations and millions of years of progress. Status? Valor asked. No resistance, replied the Silicon Consciousness operator, its voice cool and emotionless. No defensive measures detected. Human colonists are gathering in the central plaza. No signs of panic or evacuation. Valor allowed himself a smug ripple of motion. Begin the transfer. Down below, transport beams activated. Crystalline collection fields shimmered to life, stretching from the ships down toward the surface in glittering arcs of light. They began sweeping across the buildings, targeting the colonists for immediate containment and stasis. But then, nothing happened. Not a single human was transported. No screams, no scrambling, no fight, just absence. They've disappeared, the operator said, puzzled. What? Valor barked. They were there a moment ago. They're gone, Commander. The beam struck empty space. No biological matter, no energy signatures. It's as if the targets weren't real. Then a voice echoed across every frequency. It wasn't a council broadcast. It wasn't static. It was human. We warned you. Maya Rodriguez's voice was unmistakable, even filtered through signal encryption. Clear, calm, icy. The colonists were evacuated weeks ago. What you saw were projections, holograms. Primitive, by your standards, perhaps. But funny how expectations can blind you. For a moment, no one spoke. Then chaos. In the observation deck of his research vessel, Dr. Clare's claws clicked rapidly across his console. Energy readings from the colony's main power plant were spiking well beyond expected fusion levels. The readings were erratic, not uncontrolled, but orchestrated. Commander, Claire transmitted urgently. The colony's fusion core, it's not what we thought. It's not just a power source. Back on the command bridge, alarms began to scream. What are we detecting? Valor demanded. The readings flooded in. Subspace tremors. Dimensional feedback loops. Energy cycling in a spiral pattern only theorized before now. And then, the explosion. But it wasn't a fireball. There was no mushroom cloud, no planetary destruction. Instead, reality folded. The hyperspace junction that had made Epsilon so valuable collapsed inward. The gravitational architecture of the region destabilized, sending shockwaves through trade corridors that had taken centuries to stabilize. Entire navigational charts went dark. Long-established travel routes became unusable in seconds. The galactic equivalent of a massive interstate highway system had just been turned into a black hole of strategic ruin. And it had been done without a single weapon fired, without a single casualty. A new message played this time live. Admiral Chen Weiling, Earth Defense Force. She appeared calm, composed, standing before a neutral gray background that told nothing and everything. Consider this a measured response, she said. No lives lost, no cities destroyed, just a message. You ignored our warnings. Now you've been inconvenienced. Commander Valor's tentacles trembled in fury. You primitives dare? We dare, Admiral Chen said, interrupting him with the coldness of command. And we planned for this. The preparation you never saw back on his ship, Claire was reviewing logs in stunned silence. 15 years ago, the humans had first arrived on Epsilon. Back then, the planet had been nothing a dusty rock at the edge of mapped space. Not strategic, not even fertile. And yet they'd built there, not haphazard, not recklessly, deliberately. They had established infrastructure well beyond the needs of a fledgling colony. Deep core facilities, signal dampeners, subsurface generators, all disguised as basic development. Claire pulled up archival footage. Human engineers laying fiber optic cable, drones digging trenches. Reports filed as mundane, but now re-examined, everything clicked. It wasn't a colony built on a hyperspace junction. It was a hyperspace junction built into a colony. They knew, Claire whispered aloud, they knew this might happen, and they planned for it. They didn't build a trap. They were the trap. The deception in the emergency session that followed the explosion. The council fell into disarray. Zenra paced restlessly, her crystalline form pulsing erratically with stress. This should not be possible, she snapped. Their technology doesn't support this level of dimensional manipulation. Based on what they've shown us, Claire said, stepping forward. But what if what we saw was only what they wanted us to see? Another silence fell. Claire activated his terminal and brought up a new visual, a layered projection of human colony activity, side by side with projected energy usage and engineering records. Everything we've cataloged about human progress, their ships, weapons, propulsion, is a carefully managed illusion. They've been hiding their real capabilities. Possibly for decades. Impossible, the Silicon Consciousness objected. Armadas, your models are on, Claire snapped. They're based on incomplete data. They're visible technology. But think about it. How many times have we accessed their classified systems? How many times have we bypassed their encryption? Silence again. The truth was ugly. They had never needed to, because they had never tried. They had assumed superiority. That assumption had blinded them. And now, that blindness had consequences. The second message then came another message, this time only text. For Maya Rodriguez, that was just a courtesy response. Please don't make us send a serious one. Valor erupted. He threw his weight against the command interface. Prepare the fleet. We'll respond in kind. Let's see how long they last against real force. But even as his rage boiled over, reports were pouring in. Across the galaxy, ships that had once tracked human movements now found themselves unable to detect anything. Colonies that had been considered vulnerable were activating energy shields of unknown design. Human vessels that had looked outdated were vanishing from scanners completely. It wasn't just a trick, it was a mask falling off, and the face beneath it was terrifying. Revelation: the humans had never intended to fight conventionally. They knew they couldn't match the Council fleet for fleet. Not at first, so they didn't try. Instead, they played a long game, a slow game. They let the Council believe they were weak. They let them believe Earth's expansion was fragile. They allowed surveillance, allowed analysis, allowed dismissal. Because the greatest weapon humanity had wasn't firepower, it was timing and patience. They waited and waited. And now, finally, they had sprung the trap. Not to destroy the Council, but to prove a point. That strength unrecognized was still strength, and that warnings ignored always carried consequences. The new frontier back aboard his vessel, Claire sat before his console, reviewing the Epsilon blast one more time. The energy pattern didn't just disrupt hyperspace, it restructured it. They hadn't merely destroyed the junction, they had redrawn the map. That meant human engineers had long ago understood the dimensional infrastructure of the galaxy and had planned how to break it safely, without civilian casualties. It wasn't an act of terror, it was surgical. A message written in the language the Council had refused to read: action. Claire leaned back in his chair, stunned by the scale of it. The humans had played weak, played primitive, played slow, but only because they hoped desperately that cooperation was still possible. When that failed, they responded with restraint. But the trap was still there, and it had been waiting the whole time. Conclusion: a mistake that changed the galaxy. The attack on Epsilon wasn't a failure of strategy. It was a failure of imagination. The Council had assumed that age equaled wisdom, that longevity equaled dominance. But the humans had shown them a different kind of power. The power to prepare, to warn, to wait. And when necessary, to act not with vengeance, but with precision. Now, Epsilon was gone. The galaxy's trade routes lay in ruins. And Earth had made its point with terrifying grace. You were warned, and you didn't listen. The Battle of Proxima Ridge began with silence. For the Galactic Council, it was meant to be a decisive act of dominance. After the humiliation at Epsilon Colony after the hyperspace junction was obliterated in a display of precision sabotage, the Council wanted to reassert its authority, to remind the galaxy who held power. Their pride demanded it. And so, they deployed a fleet. Not a diplomatic envoy, not another warning, a fleet. The largest and most advanced armada ever assembled, led personally by Supreme Commander Valor, whose rage had grown like a wound since Maya Rodriguez's last message. That was just a courtesy response. Please don't make us send a serious one. Now they would send their own message written not in words but in fire and force. They had chosen Proxima Ridge, a human mining outpost in a region that, until recently, had been considered strategically unimportant. But after the Epsilon incident, every human-controlled territory was now seen as a potential threat. Valor's command ship, the Infinite Accord, took position above the ridge, flanked by 100 support vessels. They had prepared for every contingency. Their ships were shielded with quantum fields that could absorb singularity-level impacts. Their weapons bent matter itself, Their AI systems could calculate 1 billion tactical permutations in the time it took a human to blink. And below them, a handful of primitive-looking mining ships hovered lazily above a rocky surface. They appeared unshielded, unarmed. Some still had visible carbon scoring along the hulls, the wear and tear of atmospheric entry. They didn't even attempt evasive maneuvers. To Valor, it was almost disappointing. Enemy vessels holding position, reported the Silicon Consciousness operator. No shield signatures detected. No weapons locked. Then let's finish this, Valor growled. Initiate the attack sequence. Show them what defiance costs. The first salvo beams of pure energy burst forth from the Council's warships, cutting through space like white-hot lances. Explosions should have followed. Shields should have flared, at the very least, debris. But instead, the beams passed through the human ships. Every single one. Not a scratch, not a tremble, not even a hit. The fleet was firing at ghosts. Holograms, someone whispered on the command deck. Valor's tentacles twitched violently. Where are the real ships? And that's when they saw them. Appearing behind the Council's fleet, as if birthed from nothing, came the actual human ships. Silent, sleek, lethal. Gone were the clunky vessels the Council had cataloged. These new ships shimmered with advanced material alloys, curved in aerodynamic shapes that reflected no known energy spectrum. Their engines were silent, invisible, but the gravitational footprint they produced was massive. Within seconds, the battlefield had flipped. The Council fleet, once poised above a seemingly defenseless target, was now surrounded. Then a voice filled every channel. "This is Admiral Chen Wheeling, Earth Defense Force." Her tone was calm, measured, inevitable. "Remember when we warned you not to make us mad? Well, congratulations. Weapons that shouldn't exist, the human ships didn't fire lasers or launch missiles. They didn't need to. Instead, they deployed something else, entirely something the Council didn't even have names for. Localized spatial distortions appeared near the edges of the fleet. Ships caught in them began to shimmer, then flicker, then vanish. Some reappeared seconds later, drifting lifelessly. Others didn't return at all. Council vessels aged before their operators' eyes. Hulls corroded in seconds. Crews screamed into the comms as their biological clocks accelerated into dust. Others were trapped in tight time loops, watching the same moment repeat over and over, their systems locked in recursive failure states. The Council's most powerful shields were useless. Their smartest AI didn't understand what was happening. Their infallible fleet was falling apart. In 6 minutes, 30% of their forces were gone. Not damaged, gone. Disappeared from existence or broken beyond recovery. Another 20% was frozen in superposition, existing in fractured states between presence and absence like flickering mirages. The remainder tried to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The illusion shattered in the Council chamber far from the battlefield. The horror unfolded in real time. Dr. Clear watched it all from his private observation suite, his scales pale with dread. He had warned them. Again and again he had warned them. And now, his worst fears were not only confirmed, they were underestimated. They lied to us, High Counselor Zenra gasped. Everything they showed us, every piece of tech, was a lie. No, Claire said, his voice hollow. It wasn't a lie. It was a performance. They let us believe what we wanted to believe. That they were backward, clumsy, primitive. But how? She demanded. How could they advance so fast? Claire looked up at the screen. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they've had this for years, decades even. They just never showed it. A new transmission came through. Admiral Chen again. This time, she didn't speak. She simply showed them. A data packet streamed into Council systems, bypassing firewalls with terrifying ease. The contents included footage, specs, engineering diagrams of ships, weapons, and systems the Council didn't even have theoretical frameworks for. Quantum phase drives, temporal weapons, consciousness transfer, technology not expected for another 1,000 years of development if the Council had continued their current pace. We didn't develop this overnight, Kim Chen's voice. We've had it, we just never needed to use it. Until now. The Ghost Fleet, as the battle continued, another revelation took root. The Council had long believed Earth's fleets were small, that the humans only had a few dozen warships, maybe 100, tops. They were wrong. Across the galaxy, primitive human ships vanish from known locations, replaced by stealth vessels, some bearing completely unknown registry codes. Human colonies previously listed as developing began emitting energy signatures comparable to capital-class military installations. Council surveillance networks failed one by one. Their quantum trackers returned gibberish. Human forces appeared simultaneously across multiple sectors. They hadn't been building an empire, they'd been hiding one, and now, piece by piece, they were showing it. Checkmate without casualties back on the Infinite Accord. Valor stood frozen. What words could he speak? How could he justify this? His fleet had been humiliated, his pride shattered. Then, once again, a message arrived. This time, from Dr. Marcus Blackwood, recently appointed human liaison to the Council. He wasn't a soldier, not a diplomat, just a man in simple civilian clothing, and somehow that made him more terrifying than the admirals. "You thought we were primitives?" Blackwood said casually. "And to be fair, we let you think that." He smiled a small, infuriating smile. "Want to know the funny part? We didn't do this out of malice or ambition. We did it because we hoped, desperately, that you'd never make us prove ourselves." Another visual appeared, battle analytics from Proxima Ridge. Council casualties, 0. Human casualties, 0. Not one life had been lost, but the point was made. The Council, the proud rulers of the stars, had been checkmated completely, decisively, and no blood had been spilled. Yet, the terrifying truth. Claire stood again before the emergency assembly, his voice calm but grave. "They didn't just win a battle," he said. "They dismantled our perception, they exposed our hubris, and they did it without breaking a sweat." He paused, then activated a new data feed. This wasn't humanity fighting at full capacity. The room froze. This was them showing restraint. They had the ability to destroy us. And they didn't. Zenra collapsed into her chair, silent. Valor stared at nothing. No one spoke. Conclusion. The moment the galaxy changed, the Battle of Proxima Ridge was more than a conflict. It was a revelation. The day the Council realized that the galaxy they thought they ruled was already home to a species that didn't want to conquer, but could, if forced. Humans had played the long game, played it quietly, patiently, and when the time came, they struck not to destroy but to warn one final time. Because when they said, "Please don't make us mad," it wasn't bravado. It was a desperate plea, a final offer of peace before the storm. And at Proxima Ridge, the storm had barely touched the ground. Humanity's true strength wasn't in weapons. It was in strategy, patience, and restraint. This continuation is grounded in tone, logically follows the unfolding events, and explores humanity's psychological and strategic mastery. The quiet blade in the wake of Proxima Ridge, the galaxy held its breath. The battle hadn't just changed the tide, it had flipped the table. Supreme Commander Valor's pride had shattered, his mighty fleets scattered like dust in a storm. But the true damage wasn't physical. It wasn't in hulls torn apart or ships lost to subspace anomalies. It was psychological. The galaxy's most powerful civilizations, beings who had transcended biology, who manipulated gravity and light, who had stood atop the technological pyramid for millennia, were now afraid. Not of human weapons, but of human minds. No one said it aloud, not yet, but the thought circulated like an infection. What else have they been hiding? The deeper layer, Dr. Clare had returned to his vessel after Proxima Ridge, not in triumph, but in stunned reflection. He had been the only one to raise his hand against the vote to relocate Epsilon, the only one to speak up when the Council had ridiculed human warnings. Now, every console aboard his lab ship glowed with data he could barely keep up with. The flood of revelations hadn't stopped after the battle, it had intensified. New signals, new anomalies. Colonies previously believed to be agricultural outposts now showed fluctuating quantum fields. Energy readings that, by Council metrics, simply shouldn't exist. And yet there they were. He was pouring through thermal signatures of a station orbiting a gas giant when something clicked. "This wasn't developed last week," he muttered. "This wasn't reactionary. This was positioned." Years ago, the timelines matched. The colony at Epsilon, 15 years old. The mining outpost at Proxima, established 18 years ago. The human stealth cruisers that ambushed the Council fleet. Their engine signatures were traceable barely to prototypes tested nearly 2 decades earlier. That's when Claire realized the terrifying truth. They had planned for war, not as conquerors, but as contingency. As if they'd known, even before contact, that someday someone would force their hand. A different kind of power. The council reconvened 2 days later. The atmosphere was different now, tense, muted. Gone was the smug superiority. No one joked about primitive species. No one mocked chemical propulsion. No one interrupted. Dr. Marcus Blackwood appeared on the central display again, standing in his usual understated attire. He didn't smile this time. He looked tired, measured, but not angry. "Let's make something clear," he began. "We didn't win because we had better weapons. We didn't win because we outgunned you." He tapped something off screen. A projection of the Proxima Ridge fleet appeared, both the Council's and Earth's. Our fleet wasn't larger. It wasn't stronger. Most of those ships you saw were single-generation builds. We didn't even field our most advanced platforms. He looked up. We won because we waited, because we listened, because we studied every species on the Council before we ever introduced ourselves. A hush fell over the chamber. You thought we were weak because we acted weak. You thought we were naive because we asked nicely. But restraint isn't weakness. It's discipline. The art of deception. High Counselor Zenra, once so vibrant and dismissive, now sat slumped, her light dimmed. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you hide so much for so long?" Blackwood didn't answer immediately. He allowed the silence to settle. Then finally, "Because we've seen what happens when we show our strength too early." He brought up another display: Earth's history. Wars, arms races, Cold War escalations. Moments when humanity had nearly destroyed itself out of fear of its own power. Every time we flexed our muscles too soon, someone responded by trying to match us, or beat us, or destroy us. So we learned to hide. He stepped forward on the screen, to compartmentalize, to act unimpressive, to give our potential adversaries a false sense of security. He let the words hang. "And when necessary, to build while smiling." Strategy over strength. Dr. Clare returned to his vessel's log and started mapping timelines. The more he traced, the more horrified he became. Humanity's rise hadn't been rapid, it had been hidden. Masked behind misdirection, public failures, underwhelming tech demonstrations, and carefully curated leaks that downplayed real capabilities. Their ships, many were decoys, some even designed to leak radiation signatures to support the illusion of technical immaturity. Their colonies, built atop subspace stabilizers, quietly developed as fallback positions or choke points. Their diplomats, not just messengers, but trained psychological analysts, monitoring every micro-reaction in the council chambers, feeding data back home. Their entire approach wasn't about fighting the council. It was about outmaneuvering it, silently, carefully. And when the moment came completely, the patience of a predator, most species in the council followed familiar patterns. The hive mind collective swarmed and overwhelmed. The silicon consciousness used logic and preemptive strikes. The Vacan, Claire's own species, adapted in real time using biofeedback strategies. But humans, they did something no one else did. They waited, not because they were slow, because they were planning. They studied enemies before the first shot, mapped weakness, simulated options, rehearsed failures. And then when they struck, it wasn't retaliation, it was checkmate. They didn't fight the battle, they designed it. A calculated mercy. Perhaps the most chilling detail of Proxima Ridge wasn't that Earth won. It was how they chose not to destroy. Admiral Chen's fleet could have wiped the Council vessels from space. Their weapons could age ships into scrap, isolate crews in temporal dead zones, or strand fleets in folded dimensions. But they didn't. They disabled. They warned. They pulled punches. Why? Because, as Blackwood had said, we didn't come to conquer. We came to cooperate, but only if they were allowed to. A lesson in humility. In a small breakout session after the primary assembly, Dr. Clare presented his findings to the Strategic Sciences Division. He showed them maps, timelines, growth models, and then he dropped the real bombshell. This wasn't a war, he said. It was a test. The humans weren't reacting to aggression, they were measuring it. They were collecting data, evaluating how far the Council would go, how fast they'd escalate, how they responded to peaceful warnings. "We didn't lose because we underestimated their technology," Claire said, turning off the main screen. "We lost because we underestimated their restraint." A young analyst raised her hand. What if they hadn't held back? Claire didn't answer. He didn't need to. Maya's message 3 days after the Proxima battle. Maya Rodriguez returned via hologram. No blue uniform, no visual effects, just her voice and a simple message. We hoped it wouldn't come to this. We hoped our restraint would be recognized for what it was, a chance, not a threat, a way to show that we meant peace without needing to prove our strength. But you kept pushing. She paused. We're still willing to talk, still willing to cooperate, but now, you know what we're capable of. And we won't pretend anymore. She ended the message with the phrase the council had heard 3 times before, but never truly listened to. Please don't make us mad. Now, they understood. Strength redefined in the days that followed. As the council scrambled to reevaluate its position, one realization echoed through every chamber, every research vessel, every military fleet. Humanity's strength wasn't in domination. It was in control. The ability to devastate, but not. The capacity to win through annihilation, but choose precision instead. To plan 20 years ahead and smile politely until the time came. They weren't just advanced, they were disciplined. And that, more than any weapon or fleet, was what truly made them dangerous. Conclusion: the sharpest blade is the one that weights the galaxy. Had thought strength was about power. About speed. Force. Firepower. But humanity had redefined it. Strength wasn't how loudly you roared, it was how quietly you prepared. How long you were willing to wait before acting, and how precisely you acted when the time finally came. It wasn't their weapons that brought the council to its knees, it was their restraint. It was the discipline to issue 3 polite warnings while preparing to rewrite the laws of war. It was the patience to build an empire of shadows while smiling at the stars. And it was the courage to hold back the storm even when justified because they believed peace was still worth the risk. Certainly. Below is a 2,000-word narrative written in authentic American English, based on Idea 6. Humanity's greatest deception wasn't hiding its strength but its true nature. A species capable of both war and peace, choosing cooperation over conquest. This final part includes a strong conclusion and draws a real-world parallel to offer a powerful lesson. A species misunderstood the council chamber had changed. What was once the shining heart of interstellar diplomacy, gleaming, symmetrical, proud, now felt dim. The ornate architecture, once a symbol of civilization's pinnacle, seemed gaudy, hollow, even outdated. It had stood for centuries as a beacon of reason and pride. But now, under the shadow of humanity's revelations, it felt more like a museum of arrogance. Seated at the front of the chamber, Dr. Clare adjusted his interface and took one final breath. He stood not just as a xenobiologist of the vacant empire, but as the council's appointed analyst on the human deception. Only Clare didn't believe it was deception anymore. He believed it was mercy. He stepped forward as the chamber quieted. The other species' Silicon consciousness, hive mind collective, the elder races of Liskari and Merovin, all turned their attention to the once dismissed scientist. Council members, he began, voice steady. We've spent the last standard cycle reviewing every detail of our interactions with humanity, every diplomatic message, every energy reading, every trace of the technology they allowed us to see. He paused, then projected a timeline above them. Contact, warning, escalation, retaliation, restraint. They didn't just outmaneuver us militarily. They didn't only mislead us technologically. What humanity hid was far more significant than weapons. He shifted to Earth's historical archive. They hid who they really are. The hidden nature of humanity footage began to play older of history, much of it previously dismissed as primitive anthropology. World War II, the Cold War, the space race, humanitarian movements, the invention of the internet, global cooperation against climate change, space agencies from rival nations launching missions together. In each case, Claire narrated as images played. Every time humanity reached the brink, they didn't just claw themselves back, they redefined themselves. When faced with extinction, they didn't seek domination, they sought survival. And when survival was secure, they reached out to rebuild, to reconcile, to connect. He showed footage of nuclear weapons, followed by treaties to reduce them. He showed war-torn cities, then rebuilding efforts, led by former enemies. He showed conflict, followed by compassion. What kind of species builds atomic bombs, then builds laws to never use them again? What kind of people harness quantum energy and then use it to heal, to stabilize ecosystems, to terraform deserts and to forests? The council sat in silence, watching a history they'd never bothered to understand. They warned us politely. They gave us time. They held back not because they were afraid, but because they hoped we wouldn't force their hand. The final message then, a final hologram appeared. Maya Rodriguez. No longer a simple diplomat, no longer smiling. Her expression was calm, her tone measured. But in her eyes was something that caught the entire council off guard. Not anger, not arrogance, hope. After everything, she said, you still don't understand. We didn't want to win. We didn't want to scare you. We didn't build weapons to fight you. We built them to stop ourselves from repeating the same mistakes we made on Earth. She looked around the chamber as if she were physically there. You judged us by what we showed you, but we chose to show you the best parts of us, our artists, our teachers, our dreamers. She pressed a control and new imagery filled the space. Children learning about other planets, scientists laughing over discoveries, astronauts crying while watching Earth from orbit. Please don't make us mad, she said again softly. Was never a threat. Her voice wavered just slightly, betraying something deeper. It was a plea, a galaxy forever. Changed as the hologram faded. Claire returned to center stage. The war, he said, never really happened, because the humans never let it. Proxima Ridge wasn't a battle. It was a lesson. He turned to Supreme Commander Valor, once the voice of unshakable galactic supremacy, now silent. You asked why they didn't just destroy us, Claire said. The answer is because they're better than we are, not stronger. Better. Better at planning, yes. Better at deception, perhaps. But also better at understanding that war isn't a solution, it's a failure of imagination. And peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the conscious decision to pursue empathy over ego. The charter of a new age in the weeks that followed, a new galactic charter was drafted, not by Earth, but with Earth. They were offered a seat not just as members, but as architects. The very species that had the capability to conquer half the galaxy now stood as equal partners, offering technology that could purify poisoned worlds, stabilize aging stars, and create renewable energy loops that could power entire systems without a drop of harm. Medical breakthroughs, interdimensional travel, communication across time delays, all of it shared, not because they were pressured, not because they demanded anything in return, but because, as Maya had said so simply, we want to help. The Council had tried to suppress them, and in return, humanity lifted the galaxy to new heights. The real deception, so what was humanity's greatest deception? It wasn't their stealth fleets or cloaked colonies. It wasn't the quantum weapons or the temporal distortions. No, their greatest deception, the one that shook the Council to its core, was this. They had every reason to become tyrants, every capability to dominate, and yet, when given the choice, they didn't. They chose mercy over power, patience over pride, cooperation over conquest. A mirror to ourselves, Dr. Claire concluded his address with a personal reflection. I spent my life studying patterns, behavior, adaptation. I believed I could predict how any species would act, given enough data. He looked around the room, then tapped his chest lightly. But I never accounted for a species that rewrote its own rules. Not because it had to, but because it wanted to be better. The screen behind him showed two images side by side. On the left, the Proxima Ridge fleet, quiet and efficient in its power. On the right, a human child drawing a picture of the stars, smiling. That, he said, is what we failed to see. The lesson for us all, the story of humanity's deception, isn't just science fiction. It's a parable, one we can apply here, now, in our own fractured world. In real life, too often we judge by appearance, by apparent weakness or strength, by the narrative we choose to believe about others. We make assumptions, we fear what's different, we strike first and justify later, but sometimes, the ones we fear the most aren't threats, they're guardians. Sometimes the quiet voice saying, "Please don't make us mad," isn't a threat of violence. It's a desperate attempt to avoid it. It's someone saying, "I want peace, but I will protect what matters if I have to." In that, humanity in this story reflects something real, something messy and beautiful about ourselves. We're flawed, we're reactive, but we're capable of astonishing grace when we try. Conclusion. The sharpest truth at the very end, a final message was displayed in the council chamber. Not from a diplomat, not from a commander, just a child on Earth staring into a telescope. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "I hope they're nice." It was that simple. It had always been that simple. The humans didn't come looking for enemies, they came looking for friends. But they had learned, long ago, to bring armor just in case. And so, their greatest deception wasn't hiding their power, it was hiding their hope. And praying the galaxy would choose peace before they had to unchain the storm. They never wanted to rule the stars, they just didn't want to be ruled by fear. In the end, the galaxy learned the lesson the hard way, but it learned, and humanity, mysterious, misunderstood, miraculous, had given it a gift no one expected, not dominance, but dignity. Not superiority, but solidarity. Not revenge, but a better way forward. That was their final warning, and their first invitation. Something better for everyone.